Imagine yourself at a beautiful lake, surrounded by giant trees and the soft sounds of nature. Swans glided gracefully across the water, their white feathers reflecting the sunlight, looking perfect. Now, imagine you are a crow. A crow flying freely through the skies, fast and full of energy, but when looking at the swans in the water, you feel a pang of insecurity. Why can't I be as graceful as they are? Croak, the bravest crow, thought just that. He wanted to be like the swans, to feel the peace they seemed to carry with them. But is that even possible? If you've ever wondered if you're trying to be something you're not, this story will show you that we all have something unique. So, don't miss the chance to discover this valuable and profound lesson. Subscribe to the channel now and join me on this incredible journey of self-discovery. Are you ready to understand the true power of being yourself? Press the button and come fly with us. In a peaceful village, hidden between mountains and ancient trees, there was a crystal-clear lake where nature seemed to breathe in peace. The waters reflected the sky and clouds like a mirror, and the graceful swans ruled over the lake. They were elegant creatures, with soft white feathers that shimmered in the sun. They glided across the lake with almost magical movements, as if they were part of the water itself. However, one sunny morning, the lake's silence was broken by the flapping of black wings. A group of crows, known for being clever and adventurous, arrived at the lake, led by a curious crow named Croak. Croak and his friends had always lived in the depths of the forest, where the sky was their kingdom, and the wind was their ally. They flew high and far, but on that day, something different caught Croak's attention. From the top of a tree, he watched the swans calmly swimming on the surface of the lake. The way the swans floated seemed so peaceful, so effortless. Croak, who always enjoyed trying new things, was fascinated by the scene. He thought to himself, if I can swim like that, I'll surely be admired by everyone. The idea excited him, and without thinking twice, Croak called all his fellow crows. Come see this. He shouted, his black feathers gleaming in the sun. Look how amazing these swans are. They swim with such grace, with such calm. What if we learned to swim like them? Just think. We would become as majestic as the swans and be admired everywhere. The other crows, always ready for new adventures, were intrigued by the idea. They flew down from the trees in a flock, landing around the lake. They watched the swans with admiration, but also with a hint of envy. Croak, the boldest of them all, decided to be the first to try. He took a few steps to the edge of the lake and with a brave leap, dove into the water. But instead of gliding gracefully like the swans, Croak started thrashing awkwardly. His wings flapped wildly in the water, creating a chaotic splash. He tried to stay afloat, but swimming was definitely not his specialty. The swans, watching from a distance, continued to swim peacefully, paying little attention to the clumsy crow. It's not as easy as it looks. Croak shouted, trying to balance himself in the water. He gave it his all, but with every move, he seemed to sink deeper. The other crows, seeing their leader in trouble, decided that perhaps it wasn't a good idea to try. One of the more sensible crows, named Noctis, flew to the shore and said, Croak, maybe swimming isn't exactly our best skill. We're great in the sky. We fly faster than any other creature. Perhaps we should accept that. But Croak, stubborn as always, wasn't ready to give up right away. He struggled a bit longer, but eventually, tired and soaked, he agreed that Noctis was right. Climbing out of the water, wet and with ruffled feathers, he looked at the swans, who still swam serenely, unconcerned by his effort. You're right, Croak said with a tired laugh. Swimming is definitely not our strength. We may not be as graceful in the water as the swans, but we're masters of the sky, and I think that's more than enough. The crows laughed, relieved that Croak had finally accepted it. They spread their wings, and together, they flew back to the safety of the trees. From above, they could see the lake in all its beauty, and even though they hadn't learned to swim like the swans, they realized they had something special, the freedom of flight. And so, Croak and the crows continued their adventures in the skies, accepting that although they weren't swans, they were true kings of the wind. After all, everyone has their own way to shine, and you don't have to be like others to be admired. With Croak and his friends returning to the safety of the trees, it became clear to them that not everything that looks easy from afar really is. However, Croak, being a leader with an adventurous spirit, wasn't someone who would be discouraged by a failure. Even after his brief fiasco at the lake, he wasn't ready to give up so easily on the idea that in some way, he could match the swans in grace. That same afternoon, Croak called a meeting with his fellow crows. They were all gathered on the highest branch of an old oak tree, watching the sunset. Croak's feathers were still a bit ruffled from the disastrous dive, but he was full of new ideas. "Listen, friends," he began, puffing out his chest. "Maybe swimming isn't our strength, but that doesn't mean we should stop learning from the swans." "Who said that? Do we need to do things exactly their way? Maybe, if we use our own abilities, we can create a unique way to be as admired as the swans." The other crows were curious. Croak, despite his impulsive nature, always had good ideas. Noctis, the most cautious crow of the group, raised an eyebrow and asked, "What exactly are you suggesting, Croak? We already know that swimming isn't our strong point. What else do you think we can learn from the swans?" Croak smiled mischievously and pointed to the sky. "The swans may be the kings of the water, but we are the kings of the sky. We can fly high, we can move quickly, and that's something they can never do. What if we showed the swans something only we can do? Something that would impress them as much as we were impressed by them?" The crows started whispering among themselves. The idea of impressing the swans, those graceful and almost untouchable beings, was tempting. Even though they didn't have the ability to swim, Croak was right. They could fly and do so in a way no other animal could. After much discussion, the crows decided they would put on a special demonstration for the swans the next day. They planned a formation flight, something coordinated, fast, and impressive. They would show that although they weren't masters of the water, they were masters of the sky, and that should be recognized. The next morning, while the swans were starting their usual routine of calmly swimming across the lake, the crows were already in position. Croak had trained his flock for a synchronized flight. They organized into 2 rows, ready to cross the sky above the lake in a spectacle of agility and precision. At the exact moment the sun began to illuminate the lake, Croak gave the signal. With a strong flap of wings, the crows took off from the trees, drawing complex patterns in the sky, spinning and weaving in an aerial ballet that seemed to defy the laws of gravity. They flew in circles, performed acrobatics, and dove through the air with a skill that only crows could achieve. The swans, who until then had been unaware of the crows, began to notice the movement above them. Their eyes turned to the sky, watching in fascination at what was happening. It didn't take long for all the swans in the lake to stop swimming, raising their heads to admire the spectacle. Croak led the group with impeccable precision. He dove and ascended, beating his wings with force, creating patterns in the air that left everyone speechless. It was as if the sky were their lake, and they glided through the wind currents with the same grace the swans had in the water. When the display finally ended, the crows landed back in the trees, tired but full of pride. The swans, who until then had paid little attention to them, were silent for a few moments, admiring what they had just witnessed. Finally, one of the swans, the oldest and wisest of the group, approached the shore and said, "You crows are true masters of the sky. We would never be able to do something like that. What you showed today is something unique, something only you can do. We swans admire the way you dominate the skies, just as we dominate the waters." Croak, feeling victorious, smiled humbly and replied, "And we admire the way you glide across the lake, with a grace we will never have. I think we can all learn from each other, but perhaps the most important thing is to recognize and value what we're already good at." The swans agreed, and in that moment, something changed between the 2 groups. There was no more envy or competition. Each recognized the value of the other, and more importantly, the value of their own abilities. And so, crows and swans learned to coexist in harmony, knowing that each had something special to offer the world. With a mutual admiration between swans and crows, a new balance was achieved at the lake. The swans continued to glide gracefully over the waters, and the crows to dominate the sky, knowing that both had skills that complemented each other but could never be swapped. However, even with this understanding, Croak still had an uneasiness within him. After a few days, Croak began to notice something that intrigued him deeply. He noticed that, unlike his swan friends, who always seemed at peace with themselves, there was something the crows didn't possess, that constant tranquility. While the swans swam slowly, Croak noticed how naturally serene they were, while he and his fellow crows always seemed to be restless, flying from one place to another, never completely satisfied to stay still. One morning, as the first rays of sunlight touched the lake, Croak decided that he wanted to once again try to understand the swan's secret. He flew to the shore and watched for a long time until a young swan named Sereno, who was always curious about the crows, approached him. "Hello, Croak," Sereno greeted, his voice calm and soft. "I see you've been watching us for the past few days. What's on your mind?" Croak, never one to hide his intentions, responded honestly. Sereno, I've realized that even though we crows have learned to accept our abilities and appreciate yours, there's still something about you that eludes us. You always seem so calm, so tranquil. We crows, on the other hand, are always on the move, always restless. What is the secret behind the peace you carry? Sereno smiled, tilting his head thoughtfully. It's interesting that you ask that, Croak. I believe the answer doesn't lie in what we do, but in how we accept ourselves. We swans understand that the water is our home, and in it, we find comfort. We don't try to change our nature, we simply accept it, and that brings us peace. You crows have the sky as your true home, and maybe that restlessness comes from the fact that you're always seeking new horizons, while we seek depth in what we already have. Croak pondered Sereno's words, intrigued. He had never thought of it that way and began to understand that perhaps the restlessness he felt wasn't a problem, but a characteristic of crows. The constant search for new places, new adventures, new experiences was precisely what made them unique. Where the swans found peace in stability, the crows found balance in the quest for the unknown. Still, Croak wanted to be sure. He wanted to feel, even if just for a moment, the same peace the swans seemed to carry with them. So, he decided to ask a favor. Sereno, do you think I could try once again to join you in the water? Not to try and swim like you, but just to feel what you feel? Maybe, just once, I could understand that calm you talk about so much. Sereno, always willing to help, agreed. Of course, Croak. It's not about swimming like us, but about allowing yourself to be present in the moment. Come with me, float on the water's surface, and see what happens. With that, Croak followed Sereno to the edge of the lake. This time, instead of clumsily throwing himself into the water as he had done before, he entered slowly, following Sereno's calm steps. He felt the cold water touch his feathers, and to his surprise, it wasn't an unpleasant sensation. Unlike what he expected, there was something comforting about that contact. Croak floated beside Sereno, without the need to flap his wings so hastily. This is it, Croak. Just be here, in the now. No trying to fly, no thinking about where you could be. Just feel the water and the present moment, Sereno said in his gentle voice. For the first few minutes, Croak found it all very strange. Being still like that, doing nothing, not planning his next flight or thinking about the next place to visit, was a new sensation. But little by little, he began to understand what Sereno meant. The tranquility didn't come from the water itself, but from the fact that he had momentarily let go of the constant need to be something more. As Croak floated, he looked up at the sky. For the first time, the vast space that had always called to him seemed to be at peace with him. It wasn't about stopping flying or ceasing to be a crow, but about understanding that sometimes even the most restless beings can find peace if they accept the present moment, whether in the sky or the water. After some time, Croak slowly left the lake. His feathers were wet, but he no longer felt clumsy. There was a new feeling inside him, a mix of calm and understanding. He knew he wasn't a swan and never would be. But for a brief moment, he had experienced the peace he so admired in them. And more importantly, he understood that his true nature was to fly high, explore the world, and constantly be on the move. That was what made him special. Sereno watched as Croak returned to the trees, knowing that something had changed inside the crow. And deep down, Croak knew that while he would never be like the swans, he had found a new way to be at peace with himself. After all, every being has its own rhythm, and accepting that is the first step to finding true tranquility. With harmony restored between the swans and the crows, Croak still felt a restlessness within himself. He observed the swans daily, intrigued by the calm they radiated as they glided across the lake. Meanwhile, he and his fellow crows continued flying through the sky, always moving, always searching for something new. One morning, Croak decided he wanted to understand the swan's secret. He flew to the lake's edge and to his surprise, the young swan Sereno approached, noticing his curiosity. "What's on your mind, Croak?" Sereno asked with a gentle smile. Croak answered honestly, "You always seem so calm, while we crows are always on the move. What's the secret to that peace?" Sereno thought for a moment and said, "It's not about what we do, but how we accept who we are. We find peace in the water because it's our home, and we don't try to be something else. You crows dominate the sky, but maybe you feel restless because you're always searching for something new." Croak reflected and asked a favor. "Can I try just once to feel that peace you feel in the water?" Sereno agreed and guided Croak to the shore. This time, instead of trying to swim like a swan, Croak simply floated, letting himself be carried by the calm of the moment. He realized that peace didn't come from the water, but from acceptance. For a brief moment, Croak set aside his need to fly, to explore. He was present. As he left the lake, his feathers were wet, but his mind was lighter. Croak understood that, although he wasn't a swan, he could find moments of peace within himself. His nature was to fly and explore, and that made him special, but there were also moments to just be present, accepting what is. Sereno smiled as he watched Croak leave, knowing that he had found a new form of tranquility. Croak returned to the sky, aware that despite being a restless crow, he could also sometimes find the calm of the swans. Now that we've reached the end of this incredible story between the swans and the crows, you can see how important it is to truly accept who we are, right? Swans are great at swimming, crows are amazing in the sky, but each has its own way of shining. And the big lesson here is that you don't need to be like others to be special. True strength lies in embracing what you do best. So pay attention, because the key to your success is recognizing and valuing your own abilities, not trying to be someone else. That's what will help you grow and achieve amazing things in your life. And hey, if you enjoyed this message and want to keep learning more important lessons like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. That way, you won't miss any content that will help you soar even higher, like the crows. See you in the next video.